Imagine coming out of the Walmart and you're going to your car where you get hit by another vehicle at 40 miles an hour and your arm is literally severed from your body. Well, today's guest doesn't have to imagine. It really happened to him.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. I'm David Pasqualone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the Brian Bogert story. Today, you're going to hear an awesome story from Brian. Brian is a motivational speaker, an author, an entrepreneur, a social media content creator, and so much more. But when you listen to him, I can almost guarantee you're not going to listen at twice the speed like you do some other podcast interviews, because Brian is high octane, full of energy, and already speaks fast. So unless you want to hear it sound like Mickey Mouse, you're going to have to listen at regular speed. But for us listening at normal speed, I want to tell you, Brian's story goes through some trauma and tragedy during his teenage years that a lot of people would be bitter and not recover from. Brian not only was able to recover from this, but he was able to embrace the pain to avoid suffering. He was able to learn to feel again, because when you shut off the pain, you also shut off the joy. So he learned how to get through the physical 22 surgeries when his arm was severed from his body. And he had tons of surgery and physical therapy to get movement back in his arm. But then he also talks about us taking back our lives. So get your pens and paper and know, with recording over 130 episodes of the podcast to date, this episode is one of the top two by far with the most technical challenges, but emotionally and physically and every aspect of recording a podcast, this was by far the most difficult and challenging. Now, I don't believe in coincidences, and I believe when God's trying to do something good, Satan's going to be a jerk and do something bad. I almost said a bad word, but I didn't. But in this episode, we push through. Brian's a champ and hangs with us the whole time. And we finally got you an episode. So technical glitches, sound glitches, video glitches, disconnecting glitches, emotional ups and downs and ins and outs and everything you can imagine, but all to bring you this content that will hopefully not only entertain you, but change your life for the better. Also, stick around to the end. At the end, there's an additional segment where Brian offers you a special access to his program. So enjoy this episode, take notes, more than anything, apply it. And if you need to reach out to Brian or myself, check out the show notes and give us a holler. Enjoy the episode. Hey, Brian, how are you today, brother?
Dude, I'm good. I got a lot of energy today, and I'm excited to be here with you. We've tried this a couple times, so the universe must be ready for us today.
Amen. Yeah, I was just telling the listeners about you just a little bit, what to expect in the episode and how high octane this is going to be. So we are all excited. Before we get going, we're going to go deep and we're going to go wide into your story and a bunch of gold for our listeners. But if there was one thought that our listeners are going to get in this episode that they can take, apply to their lives, and run with, what is that going to be today, Brian?
I think that the biggest thing that they're going to take away is the falsity of our narratives and how to actually make sure that we no longer hand over the pen to anybody else to write our story, but we take it back and can write our own.
Excellent. Excellent. And that is so true and so needed. So let's start off. Where did Brian's story begin? And take us through today how you learned this important lesson, and we'll stop along the way and share the practical steps of how our listeners can break free and start actually living their own lives too, instead of just existing. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
Then let's do it, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start way back when, and I had a really unique opportunity when I was a little kid for us to live in multiple different countries. So I lived in Australia and England both before the age of 5. Got a chance to really experience different cultures and connections, but it also meant I had a really strong connection with my family and my brother primarily. Fast forward a little bit, and I'm actually going to ask you and everybody who's listening, unless they're driving, to close their eyes for just 1 second. I want you to imagine going to a store, having a successful shopping trip, breezing through the checkout line, walking out the door and feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin, the breeze through your hair, and you've got a pep in your step. You're headed back to your car and you're going to go on and have a great day. And as you're fumbling in your pocket to grab your keys, you turn your head and you see a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. Go ahead and open your eyes. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I went to our Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to the car, anybody who's known me for more than about 2.5 seconds or has been listening knows that I talk fast, I walk fast. I've got a bunch of energy for life. So it wasn't a surprise to them I was the first one in the car. But this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally reach into her purse, grab her keys, stick it in the door, turn the key so that we go on with our way. And as I'm standing there waiting for her to unlock the doors, a truck pulls up in front of the store, parks, and the driver and middle passenger get out. Passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So David, he did what any one of us would do, and he scooted his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Went up over the median in where the car was parked, went over the tree, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to sever my left arm completely from my body. So it's August 10th, 1992, 6:10 p.m., 115-degree day. The next thing my mom hears is, "Mommy, Brian's arm is over there," as my brother looks down and sees my arm laying 10 feet away in the parking lot. Fortunately for me, my guardian angel was also there that day. And I've told this portion of the story a gazillion times, and I always have to honor her because I'm forever indebted to this woman for my life and my limb. But the story got even more powerful. See, there was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place, and she saw the literal life and limb scenario. I met this woman for the first time on the 30th anniversary of my accident, August 10th of this year, 30 years later. And what I found out was I've always said I was forever indebted to her for choice to go into action versus turning her head to go on with her day. And the reason that point got reinforced is she was actually with a friend that day. And her friend was also a nurse. And her friend said, "I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole." She came over into action, stopped the bleeding on the main wound, and saved my life. She instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, fill it with ice, and get my detached limb on ice within minutes to give me a fighting chance of having both my life and my limb restored. So if it wasn't for this woman, I either would not be here with you today, brother, or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump. That's just the reality. And so I know that a lot of the listeners probably weren't expecting to go there today. I know I've got a unique story, but I have to say that what I've learned in all this time is we all have unique stories. What's important is that we pause long enough to become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have that ability. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So that's one of the reasons I'm happy to be here with you today, brother.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And with this, if you were watching the video, you saw Brian hold up his arm and you see where the bicep meets together now, and it's different. So we'll put a link in the show notes to a picture on our website if you're listening through solely a podcast, or check out the video so you can just see that. But going back to that moment, Brian, when that accident occurred, was your mother or brother injured, or was it solely you because you were already in the car?
I wasn't in the car. I was standing next to the car waiting for it to unlock the doors, and we think that my hand was on the handle. They
Oh,
were
okay.
they were 3 or 4 feet behind me. And so I was the only one injured.
Wow. Okay. And then at that point, what did your recovery look like, and what did life look like? Also, was your father in the home, or was it just you, your brother, and mom?
My dad was at the office that day. And
Okay.
when we were recounting the story last week, although I've heard it before, I did not necessarily have the full context or remembered it anyway. You see, this was 1992. There weren't cell phones, right? There wasn't the same type of technology and ability. And so he got a call at his office from someone at the store who called to tell him he needed to get to the hospital. But he was sent to the wrong hospital. When he got to the ER at that other hospital, he had to break down the story there. He went to 3 different hospitals, and it took him 6 hours to find us because we had gone already to 2 different hospitals in that period of time, and the information wasn't flowing. So my dad was operating in complete fear because he didn't know who was injured. He just knew that something happened with his family and he needed to get to the hospital. He didn't know who, he didn't know what. And so my dad then ended up coming full circle and finding us. And the recovery after that period of time, it took 5+ years on the physical side, 22 surgeries, occupational therapy 3 days a week, learning how to feel, learning how to touch. There was a 19-hour nerve surgery where they put nerves from different parts of my body in. They reattached the nerves, which are like rope fibers, so they don't ever really fully align, but the brain can reprogram itself pretty beautifully, right? And then my bicep, as you called it, is my gracilis from my leg. I don't have a lat on the left side of my back, and I don't have a tricep. And so if I put my hand over my head, we'll do this for the video effect too. Look, hits me in the head. I cannot stop the resistance. But what's interesting is I can extend my arm. I've learned how to substitute and use it. That was all through the ability to have therapy, integrated approach with family and connection for those 5 years following.
Wow. And what was, obviously this was not an easy journey. And right now you're positive, energetic, and upbeat. Have you always been that way? Is your family like that? Is that something that developed from this accident?
Yeah. I think I've always been that way to some degree. And that's what people would always say. My second grade teacher, right after it happened, asked my mom, like, whoa, what happened with Brian? Like, did he have a brush with death? And all of a sudden he's got this like vigor for life. And she's like, no, he's been like that since he was born. And so what I will tell you though, is what the accident gave me was it gave me a depth of perspective. It gave me humility, and it gave me a deeper appreciation for life because I've got a very healthy relationship with mortality. And so why my energy now can flow so deeply is it didn't always. You see, I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope. What I didn't realize is I also shut off emotional pain for 25 years. So though I had the energy, though I had the excitement, though I had the positivity, I didn't have the same vibration and frequency because it was coming intellectual only. It wasn't coming from all of me and allowing my heartbeat and rhythm to be what actually is felt through my energy. So it's given me a whole lot. What I had to heal physically took me 25 to 30 years to heal emotionally and spiritually.
And then let's talk about that journey, because we have listeners who probably haven't been in such a dramatic accident, but they've had other damage done to them, or they've had other injuries, or maybe they have been in something just absolutely
Hey, David, you
tragic.
froze again, bro.
So, ladies and gentlemen, both Brian and I are trying our best to record this interview, and I'm actually going to leave a little bit of the difficulties in, so you understand that behind the scenes when we're recording podcasts, it takes a lot of time and effort and grace on our guest part. I mean, this is the third time we've tried to record this episode, so I don't believe in coincidences. Brian was saying his energy's off the chart lately, and we have great content to bring you. So because of that, evil's trying to stop it. So let's get right back into the episode. Brian, we are talking about the accident, and we are transitioning into your recovery. And what did you learn from that process in the recovery? We know it was hard. We know it was difficult. We know it was long. But for those people of our listeners, and myself included, who are still recovering, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, financially, from just hardships in life, what did you learn through this process? How did you learn to endure? And what would you recommend to our audience to keep moving forward in the fight?
Absolutely. So one of the first lessons I learned was when I was sitting in the ICU bed, feeling sorry for myself. And we had other families in the ICU coming up to us saying, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We're so sorry for what happened to you. And as I'm sitting there feeling sorry for myself, we look over and their kid's laying in the ICU bed next to me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live for another 30 days. Perspective hit me pretty hard right out of the gate, because I learned from that. I learned very early not to get stuck by the things that have happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with them. And what I've realized through all this time is that moved people move people. And so now I get to fulfill my purpose in life by allowing my truth to give others permission to live theirs and moving as many people as possible on our mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. So that lesson is a very profound one that we've absolutely integrated. Another lesson that didn't come right away, but it was one that certainly came from those first 5 to 7 years post-accident. You see, I was in a fog. I was being guided through the process, but my parents were not. They were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of therapy, and the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they literally willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, to do what was tough, to ultimately embrace the pains required to strengthen and heal me. So the lesson that's one of our core philosophies at this point is that what they did was ultimately teach me to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And when that's done appropriately, that's also where we gain freedom. But lastly, this period of time taught me what I told everybody's going to learn through this whole period was the value, but also the falsities and areas that our narratives can fail us. You see, right after the accident, I didn't want to be defined through the lens of what somebody else thought they would be capable of in my situation. And I can't tell you how many times people would ask me what happened to me. I'd tell them what happened. They'd turn to my parents for validation. They didn't even believe my own story. So what did I do? I didn't want to be put into boundaries, and I didn't want to be defined based on other people's limitations they were placing on me. And so I created a strong mental narrative as I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, I can do anything myself. And that served me very well in recovery for the next 13 years, right? We all hear about mental toughness, mindset, and how much that can help you. And yes, by the way, that's the case. What you'll learn later, though, as I unpacked, is that it's only part of the equation. You see, when I was 20, I was snowboarding. I went down, I re-broke my left arm, compound fracture, and I almost lost it again. I went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of the medical malpractice of reopening this potential disaster inside my arm that wasn't going to be anatomically correct for anything that they were used to. And so through that 10 months of period of time, what I learned was truly the power of my narrative, because nobody was there. And it wasn't because I didn't have people in my life that loved me. I didn't have friends. I had tons. It's that everybody believed that Brian was good, Brian was strong, Brian was capable, and he didn't need anybody's help. And if he did, he'd ask for it. But in the most vulnerable period of my life, I didn't have the courage to ask for help. And that's when I realized the value of human connection that I needed to start to lean into. So I shifted that next period of my life into focusing on vulnerability and authenticity, which I believe are the glue that binds human connection. So that's what the first part of the recovery looked like. And from this point forward, it was recovering on the internal side, not just the physical side.
That's excellent. And then you mentioned while you were going through life, there was damage to you physically and you were addressing that. But then 25 years later, you realize that you were shutting off pain.
Mm-hmm.
And when you shut off pain, you shut off feeling. So the good and the bad. So talk about that, because so many of us numb ourselves, whether it's through cognitive or consciousness, or whether it's subconscious, whether it's pharmaceuticals. People just numb themselves so they don't feel pain.
Yep.
But if you don't feel pain, you're not going to feel pleasure either. So take us through that part of your journey.
Yeah, there's multiple layers to this as well, but I'll start with the story that kind of helped me realize the depth of it. My daughter was maybe 2 years old at the time, 18 months to 2 years old, and we'd just been playing and we were laughing, and we lay down on the couch to watch a little show, and she rolls her little arm around my neck. She kisses me on the cheek, and she says, "Dada, I love you." And I broke down in tears from joy. And I had never experienced joy in that way before. In fact, now looking back, I can realize the day of my wedding, we don't have a single good picture because I was actually crying the entire time. And I don't have a good looking cry face, just to be clear. And so I ruined like all of our wedding photos, but I didn't identify that as joy back then, to be honest. Like, I didn't know what it was because I don't typically manifest my emotions through crying. I wish I did, because I think it's a very strong thing to watch a man cry. But as I'm crying there, realizing this is from joy, I realized just what your point was. If I haven't experienced joy this way, I certainly haven't felt shame, despair, loss in its full extent, because I'm feeling more authentically than I had before. I told you that vulnerability and authenticity, the glue that binds human connection. But what became very, very clear at this point is that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. So that 13 years of me focusing on vulnerability and authenticity, I did it from a strategical and tactical perspective, where I got really good at allowing other people to let me in, while I still protected and viewed things from an intellectual perspective. And we talk about, what do you think about that? The concept of feeling didn't exist for me. And what I realized, and one of the more powerful lessons I have now, is if we don't feel, we don't heal. And so if we don't heal, it becomes very difficult for us to escape the things that keep us stuck. Most people think the things that keep us stuck are the wrong strategy and tactics in our life. But what is definitive for me at this point, not only in working it in my own life, but working with some of the world's highest performers, is the things that keep us stuck are always a combination of the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that keeps us circling that same drain of life. And until we go through a process to move the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like we're victims and like life is fate. Our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. And so what we do largely at this point, for myself and for so many around us, is really to be able to hold a mirror up so that people can see themselves more clearly and move faster with less effort, allowing themselves to heal the layers of pain that have attributed internally, and simultaneously shed the layers of armor that they've gathered over the years to protect themselves. When they can stand in that position of vulnerability, I believe that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability. Now all of a sudden they're in a position where they no longer need to armor, and they can connect at the deepest level, and they can take back control of writing their own story.
So let's go back to first off, before we go any further, this is a different episode and it's got amazing content. But from your birth to this point in life, did we miss anything significant before we really dig into this topic?
There's lots of little pieces that are significant. My life has been all over the place. Probably the most significant is that I met my wife in college around the time that I rebroke my arm. And so my wife is as responsible for where I am today as my mom, my dad, and my brother were. Outside of that, everything else is just nuance.
Awesome. Okay. So let's do this. You said if we don't learn to feel, we don't heal. Talk to us about learning to feel again.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because I think this is really something that I want to expand into a broader thought as well, because I think it's interesting. We not only are taught not to feel, but often we're being taught to not even know how to think. And so the thinking and feeling elements of our human being self is limited. If we look at feeling and the human experience, and we look at the depths of emotion, the 1940 field book for the Army had well over 100 references to the human experience, the soft side, the recovery, the PTSD, the suffering that could exist through trauma. In today's field book, there's zero. It's situational leadership, strategic leadership, tactical leadership. We literally as a society have conditioned ourselves to not feel. In fact, that's the narrative of the world. Shove your feelings down, show up with a smile on, move faster with less effort. Like that's what they want. Nobody generally from the external narrative wants us to actually be vulnerable and feel. So we condition ourselves to not. And then you layer in the fact that from the time we're little kids, though we're born as our most authentic, brightest burning light, parents, teachers, coaches, employers start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should be this, you shouldn't be that, you should want this, you shouldn't want that, you should make this amount of money, you shouldn't make that amount of money, you should live in this neighborhood, you shouldn't live in that neighborhood. And all of a sudden, we're being told these should narratives, and should is a shame-based word because it implies that whoever we are, whatever we want, isn't good enough. So we start putting on all these layers and funneling ourselves down into this box, not based on who we are and who we want to become, but based on who the world has told us who to be, which lacks feeling and doesn't actually have the ability to think. So I think that it's not just about relearning how to feel, which, by the way, I was subconsciously and unconsciously suppressing at such an active rate that when I became aware of the fact that I needed to feel more, I was giving myself these moments to pause and recognizing how much I was actually not feeling and shoving down without even me knowing it. So it was often about just pausing just long enough to take a breath, to allow that feeling to exist so that I could attach to it and then allow myself to experience it. But now I guide people through a thinking, feeling quadrant because I think it's not just about feeling. Again, I told you the importance of our intellectual narratives, but we get emotional narratives too, and they both lie to us. So we have to learn how to think about our thinking, think about our feeling, feel our thinking, and feel our feeling. It's in that quadrant that success lives because we can see ourselves more clearly. And when we layer that quadrant on top of our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual self, now we have a three-dimensional world we know how to move through. But it takes that extra second to pause ourselves down to really understand how to move through that quadrant. And what's important is the world's highest performers, it's not just about mental toughness or mindset. Again, it's only part of the equation. The highest performers are those that understand whether they're hardwired intellectually or emotionally first, and then they learn how to tap into both narratives and to be able to balance and regulate between the two because they both lie to us. They both tell us the truth. So it also relates to how do we actually feel and communicate with others. My daughter, I have to enter through the heart. I have to enter through feeling. If I enter through feeling, then I can take her down a logical thought process. My son is exactly different. I have to enter through the head to get him to feel because he's deeply emotional. But the reality of it is not only do we have to own our own natural state, but we have to start to understand how do we identify and connect with others based on the intellectual, emotional pathways that exist. And what we know, and this is not my quote, I wish I could reference who it was. I want to say it was Lao Tzu, but the hardest journey to travel is the 18 inches from your head to your heart. We have to connect the two so that we can be holistic selves as we enter into the world.
Yes. That's so important. And it's something that I'd say the majority of the world is struggling with now. So talk about this before we go any further. Talk about what you do, your company, your team, and that's why let's set a frame of reference for our listeners. And then we're going to go back and ask you some questions.
Awesome. Yeah. So We run a couple of different companies right now. All of our businesses right now are on that collective mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible. And all of our businesses have everything to do with who. So in some form or fashion, we're helping people either discover who they are, who they're doing this for, who they're doing this with, or who they want to connect with and impact. And so we've got our coaching, we've got our courses, we have our one-to-one, our speaking, and everything that fits under this one little coaching and speaking umbrella. We've got intensive group coaching programs. We've got multiple different tiers of one-to-one coaching. And we actually have this community rapid fire coaching where we come together twice a month and give a collective whole the ability to learn and grow together at a massive scale. And so that is something that we just really, really enjoy, but I will never sell. I will never pressure. I will never convince someone to invest in themselves. All we do here is outline opportunities for people to do so. We have other businesses though. We have one that's in an automation type business to be able to replicate and demonstrate who you are to the world and attract who you want to impact in a one-to-one targeted way. We largely do this on LinkedIn, but we do this because we want to curate quality connections and curate quality conversations so that who you're talking to is more about what you want for them than what you want from them. And we can build real relationships to add value and impact into people's lives collectively in a very targeted, thoughtful way. We've got a podcast booking service that's about demonstrating who you are to the world and attracting who you want to impact in a broad base, evergreen manner. And again, it's the same type of format. It's about curating the right conversations. And we do ours based on download guarantees, not just number of shows, so that you actually have an ROI to deliver back to your marketing spend. And then we've got a bunch of things in the content and media side that we're working on that are bigger projects. A project that we have called Who Stories, where we're telling the who stories of the who's of the world. And so everything in our world is about who. And I believe it's time to end the era of what and usher in the era of who. And that begins with each and every one of you.
Very well said. Very well said. So now, if you want to get a hold of Brian, like always, check out our show notes. There's links. You can click in there. Brian doesn't just preach it. He practices it. Before the show, we were just talking about one of his posts that just blew up. Real quick, Brian, you want to tell him about what's going on, and we'll put a link to this clip in the show notes as well.
Yeah. We had a video hit 6.5 million views over the course of about a week and a half. And, the most beautiful part about it is it's a piece of content. It's one of the few pieces of content on our page that I'm not even in. It's my wife, my mom, my dad, and my brother. And my mom is actually telling the story. See, the 30th anniversary of the accident was August 10th, 2022, this month. And we went back to the accident site that day. And I just so happened to pull my phone out as my mom was starting to walk us through the specifics because I wanted to capture it. I mean, what a meaningful day. And as we did that, we sent it over our content team. They ended up creating this 38-second loop that just hits really hard. And it's been insane, the support that we've gotten from the world. So we've added, I think, over 8,500 followers, and we engage with every follower. That's a part of my process because I want to build real relationships, have real impact. And so our team is scrambling right now because it's had such trickle effect into the consistency of content that we put out there and how people have been able to identify with it and the number of stories that we're getting from remarkable people who are talking about their stories, who are sharing collectively. I mean, I feel like we're barely scratching the surface of the impact we really want to have. And this is just a really cool amplifier and a way that the 4 people who impacted me the most are featured in a video that has the most views of anything we've ever put out there.
That's awesome to hear. I'm so happy for you. And ladies and gentlemen, check out the video. Obviously, if there's 6.5 million people in a week checking it out, it's not just a monkey in a bikini dancing. There's good content there. So check it out. So let's go back, Brian, to actually the listener saying, I have this problem. I'm there. Where do I start? So you gave me great information. Is there like 2 or 3 steps or techniques or something I can try to start healing?
Yeah. So the first thing that I want you to do is to raise your level of awareness. We cannot be intentional with what we're unaware of. And what I would tell you is that most of our emotional triggers are not your fault. They're not our fault, but they do become your responsibility the second those emotional triggers start creating damage around you. And they become your responsibility the second you become aware of it. And so if you really want to move forward, I think awareness is always going to be the first place. So I'll just give everybody a quick exercise here. I want you to create 2 lists. On the one list, I want you to put all the people, places, sources of information, things that light you up, that feel you leaving energized, that you could spend 8 hours doing and it felt like 1, that you're just so in flow, so connected. You can't wait, get back to that place, get back with those people, get back doing those things. We all know what that feels like, right? But we don't often take toll on where are those sources coming from in our life. So write down all the people, places, sources of information, things that you do or go that fit into that category. And on the other list, I want you to write all the people, places, sources of information, things that you consume, etc., that leave you feeling defeated, depleted, unworthy, that make you want to slam your head against the wall at the idea of doing this repeatedly over and over and over and over again. That 1 hour actually feels like 8. You do not want to be around those people. You don't want to be in those situations. You don't want to be in those places. We all know what that feels like. But how many of us spend a ton of time still in this category? If you just simply can start with those 2 lists, it'll give you a better energetic understanding of who you are and the areas at which you may need to focus, as well as allowing yourself to remove some of the resistance and energy drain by eliminating, reducing, or diffusing as many of the things on the negative list and spending as much time on the positive list as possible. Just that alone is moving you closer to who you are. Just that alone is going to allow you to actually pay attention to what you feel around certain people in certain situations, around certain dynamics, so that you can become aware and intentional in how you want to feel moving forward.
Awesome advice. Thank you. Now, you are pressed for time. We're thankful you could be on the show. With all of the differences in this episode, I want to make sure we don't miss anything that's important to you or that will be important to impact the lives of our listeners. So between your birth and today, is there anything we missed, Brian, or anything you want to add before we transition to where's Brian today, where are you going, and how can we help you get there?
Yeah, I think we've hit on all the high points with one exception. Although I embedded it subtly, I also really want to highlight directly that truly who you are or who you're capable of becoming is also going to be a direct reflection of your ability to sit in that space with yourself and how honest you are with the people that you're surrounding yourself with. It's more than just you. Like I said, it was my story for a lot of years, but if I'm being honest, it's our story. It impacted my mom, my dad, my brother, and my wife significantly over these periods of time. And so understand where and how we can tap into collective stories to write collective impact together. And if we're doing that, then we realize it's bigger than any one of us individually, and we're in it more together than we are apart.
Thank you so much, Brian. It has been a true honor having you on the podcast today. You truly are a remarkable guy. I look forward to continuing the friendship. And also, I know that people who normally listen to podcasts on 1.25 or 1.5, they're probably listening at regular speed to this episode because you do talk passionately and fast. So I love it. Thank you so much. And to our listeners out there, check out Brian's website, look at his information. Reach out to him if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation. And like our slogan says, if you heard this great content and you were inspired and motivated by his story and his outlook on life, don't just listen, but do what he's recommending. Repeat it each day in the areas you need so you can have a great life in this world and, more importantly, in eternity to come. So, Brian, thank you again for being with us today, my friend.
Thank you for the opportunity to have you not only build this great platform, but for me to be with you to pour good into the world, man. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, anytime, anytime. So, ladies and gentlemen, we love you. Again, apply this information, share it with your friends and family. Hey, share it to people who have problems that you don't like. Make the world a better place, right? But that's it. I'm David Pasqualone. This was our friend Brian, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Ciao. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time today. And Brian actually has a special offer for you just because he's such a great guy and he wants to help. So, Brian, at this time, please tell our listeners about the special offer you have for them.
Awesome. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. It's access to the free portion and the very first portion of our course that we actually sell and all of our coaching clients go through. You'll have over 30 minutes of video content and beginning with the end in mind with purpose and legacy. And I want to be really clear here. Yeah, we get your email. Yeah, you're going to get a handful of emails throughout it. Yeah, you'll get 4 emails afterwards. But like I said in the episode, I will not be pressuring you. I will not be convincing you to invest in yourself. If there's value here, you'll lean in. If there's not, then that's okay. All I ask is that if it moves you, move it through the world so that we can lean into moved people, moving people. nolimitsprelude.com. I can assure you, you'll get value.
Awesome. Thank you again, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, check out that great offer. And most of the time, people give you stuff for free and it's not really valuable. This is valuable content. Be thankful, be grateful, take advantage of it, sign up and apply it. That's it. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, brother.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.